Budapest, capital of Hungary, known as the Pearl of the Danube. It is as charming as it is unique. Product of two cities, Buda and Pest, it harbors a double identity. Its spectacular landscapes, thermal baths, and eccentric nightlife attract people from around the world.
This city is like an old sitting chair. It's really convenient. Not all the streets and buildings are very pretty, but there's a certain beauty in it.
Over time, Buda and Pest's historical differences have created very distinct communities on either side of the Danube.
The two cities evolved independently from each other, and they have different characters.
The city has now become a cultural hub, and today, a large part of its renaissance is taking place in its Jewish quarter.
Nowadays, the biggest Central Eastern European Jewish population is in Budapest.
Neglected for many years during the communist regime, Budapest is now a lively metropolis where old meets new in a very surprising way. Budapest owes its success to the Danube River and its port, which have made it one of the most coveted cultural, commercial, and industrial hubs in Central Europe. But the city we know today brings together two distinct towns. Buda, located on the river's west bank, and Pest, on the east bank.
And the two cities evolved independently from each other, and they have different characters. Buda is dominated by hills and lots of green, whereas Pest is dominated by densely built up residential areas, industrial quarters.
Oh, this is lovely.
Yes, very nice. Look at that big cruising ship coming up from Passau.
We see a lot of those boats. It's a very common activity.
Well, it has become very important recently as international boundaries disappeared along the Danube, and Europe became unified within the European Union. And then, of course, this kind of tourist attraction has become also very attractive. You arrive to Budapest airport, get on a cruising ship towards Vienna or even Passau, and you catch your flight in Munich or Vienna airport. So this kind of combination of cruising flight has become very important in tourism. Of course, 100 years ago, there was no tourism, at least not at this scale. So the role of the river was much more important in terms of industrial development, like milling industry, shipbuilding industry, and other types of industrial activities. And of course, the Danube provided drinking water for the residents of Budapest and provided fish for the residents in previous centuries. So the Danube really played an important role in the evolution and the development of the city. The main port of Budapest is now located on Chapel Island, further towards north, so not in the downtown area. And it was opened officially 1927. Before that, all the long-distance cargo arrived to the very heart of the city, so you can imagine how crowded the Danube was at that time.
You don't see cargo anymore, or very rarely.
You see very rarely, yes. This type of function got lost due to, of course, globalized economy and high-speed transport on motorways and even in air. So
How's the quality of the water?
it has improved a lot. Before the political changes, half of the sewage of Budapest was drained down to the river. Now, no sewage water flowing to the Danube. So the water quality has improved enormously.
Do you swim in the Danube?
Well, further out towards north, yes. Well, people use the river for recreation a lot. Of course, there are a couple of islands on the Danube, like Margaret Island is perhaps the most important among these islands on the Danube because it is in the heart of Budapest and it is used by its residents for recreational purposes. These islands provide good opportunities to develop recreational facilities, walking, spa development, and other entertainment. And the Danube serves as a wind channel, actually. Even in hot summer days, next to the river, due to the wind, permanent wind, you feel it is quite refreshing. So this is, as a microclimate, it is important.
I think Budapest is still one of Europe's best kept secrets.
Well, I think you are right, and I think this is not surprising that the city is called as the Queen of the Danube, because we know that kings are usually ugly and the queens are beautiful, and this city, I think, is beautiful.
The city's core lies without a doubt in Pest, far more urban than Buda. But the neighborhoods here have long been neglected, a result of the communist rule and the chaotic urban development that followed the regime's demise.
Budapest is divided into 23 districts. It's a sprawling city with a huge surface area. For the sake of comparison, Paris proper is 5 times smaller than Budapest. So yes, the city is enormous, but Paris is actually home to some 500,000 more people. From that perspective, Budapest isn't very densely populated. Also, Budapest has a very decentralized public administrative system, split up into local self-governing bodies. So Budapest is more like a gathering of 23 small cities. The various districts have jurisdiction over housing and local matters, like the running of schools, daycare centers, and so on. So overall, local matters, essentially. But the city of Budapest itself has jurisdiction over matters that concern the entire city, and matters that involve more than one district, like social issues, for example. But over time, the districts have become political entities in their own right, which really complicates things, as there's no more global vision for the city. It's hard to promote unified social policies within that context. And it's been going on for 20 years now.
Est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui sont très Buda et très Pest?
Some residents are definitely more Buda and others more Pest. For example, I was born in Buda and lived there for 35 years or so. I'd always lived there. For me, crossing the Danube and moving to Pest was a huge deal, but I was really happy when I did, because I realized that Pest was the true Budapest. It was quite a big step for me. I don't know why, but people from Buda often say to people moving to Pest that it's too noisy, too crowded, too fast-paced, there are no trees, and it's all true. However, since I moved to Pest, I never go back to Buda. I have no reason to go back, really, except when I've got something very specific to do. Back when I was living in Buda, I'd come to Pest on a regular basis to do some shopping, meet up with friends, go out. I do lots of things, like go to university. This is the 8th district on the Pest side. It's an historic district, if you will, and it's further divided into several sub-neighborhoods. And in fact, historically, there's always been a traditional divide between the wealthier neighborhoods and the working-class neighborhoods.
Et les quartiers populaires.
Christina, c'est quand même incroyable. On voit dans la ville des trous de balles encore dans les murs.
Oui.
Ça date de quand?
De 1950.
These bullet holes date back to 1956, during the Hungarian Revolution. The revolution started in Budapest and happened mostly in this neighborhood. During the socialist era, there was no urban renewal here. That's why you still see bullet holes on the building where I live. I actually live in this neighborhood. So, yes, those are the traces of our history.
En même temps, c'est un devoir de mémoire aussi un peu.
I'm not sure people still know how these bullet holes got here. I have no idea if younger people know what they mean. But these holes will all be filled in, gradually, as the neighborhood undergoes gentrification and gets fixed up. It's inevitable, I think, but it's a really long process. It's mostly a question of how all of this will pan out. What kind of policies will it entail? Will there be social policies? How many people will have to leave the neighborhood? And where will they ultimately end up? So basically, how will gentrification impact the neighborhood? I think this trend is probably inevitable, and it may not even be a bad thing.
Qui habite dans le quartier ici?
All kinds of people live in this neighborhood. You've got the somewhat poorer merchants who were among the first to come here. It was a working-class neighborhood, but not completely run down. It was only after the war, as a result of state policy, that a much poorer and much more downtrodden population began to settle here. That's also when a large Roma minority started arriving. Then later, during the transitional period, after privatization, people started selling their apartments. So, the middle classes began leaving these inner Budapest neighborhoods to buy land or homes outside the city. You could call that suburbanization. In addition, lots of people who had to leave Budapest chose to come back. So it's a mix, really. Some came back from rural areas, others are occupying apartments illegally. So, the neighborhood is always changing, which makes it hard to foresee how things will evolve in the future.
The Roma have traditionally lived in the city's 8th district. But today, this strong and closely knit community is forced to cope with the rapid gentrification of their neighborhood.
This is the neighborhood which is mostly populated by Roma in Budapest. There is a history of poverty, a history of criminalization, and also prostitution and crime is present on the streets of the 8th district. We also need to remember that this community is also very strong, and the traditions are still kept in the Roma community, and new and inventive ways of Roma self-representation is present. And this is why this place is very important for us. First of all, the gentrification process that has been going on in the 8th district made the environment very modern, sometimes very pleasant, like this square and the playgrounds are very nice. But at the same time, we have to know that the gentrification process created new housing blocks. And these new housing blocks are really for the upper middle class, and they are produced by entrepreneurs who have pushed out all the population who have lived in the municipalities' cheaper rented apartments, because they were apartments provided by the municipality for many of the Roma families.
The city's recent transformations have certainly had a major impact on its residents. But if the Budapest we know today is considered to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world, it's largely due to its breathtaking architecture and the hard work required for its upkeep. The most spectacular buildings were built at the end of the 19th century during very prosperous times.
When you're in Budapest, more so than in other cities, you have to let your curiosity lead the way. Whenever you see an open door somewhere, you have to walk right in. That's how the city's architecture was organized. Everything revolves around the courtyards. There are all sorts of galleries and covered walkways that you can't necessarily see from the street. So you have to try to enter all these buildings, and you'll often be surprised by what you can stumble upon.
Comment ça se fait qu'il y a autant de trésors cachés ici?
I'd say there are many hidden treasures here because of the city's extremely turbulent history. Budapest has lived through its fair share of wars and invasions. As a result, the city has a very layered history. For example, some of these buildings serve a certain purpose, but when you dig a little deeper into a building's history, you might discover an eventful and rich past. So yes, digging a little deeper can be really worthwhile. This is a bookstore. Wait till you see what's on the second floor.
C'est spectaculaire. Ce genre de beauté cachée, il y en a beaucoup à Budapest.
Yes, the city is full of hidden treasures like this. But Budapest doesn't give up its secrets that easily. And because of its past, including 50 years of communism, some of these buildings may be in various states of disrepair. You really have to search out these gems. This beautiful hall was used as a warehouse for decades. They closed it down for a while after that. Then the building was sold in the 2000s. But the new owners chose not to tear it down, luckily. And after the fall of communism, these kinds of architectural treasures were gradually restored.
Budapest's incredibly eclectic architecture and design deserve a good dose of TLC. Buildings have been meticulously and progressively restored since the fall of the communist regime.
When I first arrived here, the city was just coming off 50 years of communism, so coal and heavy industries were widespread. It was a very polluted city, very dirty. In fact, the whole city looked like this. But Budapest has such a rich architectural heritage that 20 years hasn't been enough time to restore all of these buildings. When I first discovered the city, what struck me the most was the architecture. You can find every single architectural style here. Walking around the city feels like you're taking a course in architecture. Hungary was once under Ottoman rule, so the classical period of architecture didn't happen here. When Pest finally started developing itself, the city's architects borrowed from all historical styles and adapted them accordingly. As you walk around the various neighborhoods, you'll notice that the architecture is very eclectic. There's Art Nouveau, classical, Baroque, but also turn of the century. You'll also come across some Bauhaus. Of course, there are still buildings that hark back to the city's communist past, what's called socialist realism, with very little ornamentation. But they were able to preserve all this heritage because, by some miracle, the city wasn't completely destroyed at the end of World War II. That's why there are so many buildings dating back to the late 19th century. We're standing in front of the former Postal Savings Bank, which was built in 1901 by Odin Lechner, sometimes referred to as the Hungarian Gaudi. He's one of the pioneers of Hungarian architecture, actually. He wanted to confer a national style on Art Nouveau architecture, which is known as secession here. He wanted to create a Hungarian language of architecture. This type of Art Nouveau isn't as typically Western, which is usually more floral. Lechner would instead draw on folk art motifs for inspiration. This style began to emerge during what we call the National Revival period. At the time, Hungary was going through a period of peace and prosperity as a result of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, and the country had regained its sovereignty. So Leshner wanted to create a style that would help forge a Hungarian national identity.
On ne peut pas être à Budapest sans aller au bain. Et tu m'amènes dans un magnifique bain.
I'm taking you to a great bathhouse. Some of the most iconic buildings of Budapest happen to be bathhouses. The grandest and most beautiful were built during the golden age of architecture at the turn of the last century. That is, between the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There are also neoclassical baths, which look like palaces. There are Art Nouveau baths, and there are also older baths that date back to the Ottoman occupation. After all, the Turks brought their culture of baths and their notion of pleasure with them. So these baths were constructed in the 16th century. They have a very Istanbul feel to them. This bath culture is a typically Eastern phenomenon, and it's very much a part of the daily lives of Hungarians. Seeing Budapest as a spa or a thermal bath city may seem surprising at first, but as soon as you step foot inside one of these thermal baths, it becomes obvious why people call it the city of spas. The Széchenyi thermal baths are a must. They're the largest spa complex in Europe. People don't just splash around here. There are pools and thermal baths on each side, so you can swim too. But it's not about sports. Those guys are playing chess, and there are people playing cards on that table next to us. When you come here, you don't spend an hour or two. You're here at least half the day. You can swim, and there's a whole range of spa treatments. Hammams, saunas, massages, pedicures, manicures.
C'est vraiment l'idée du spa.
Exactly.
Je me demande un peu si les gens y travaillent dans cette ville. avec les sources thermales, avec les cafés.
People do work here, but Hungarians, I've never really gotten used to this since I'm not a morning person, but Hungarians get up really early to do as many things as possible. They'll get up at 6 or 6:30. That's why most thermal baths, markets, sports complexes, and pools usually open at 6 in the morning.
Il y en a combien de sources thermales à Budapest?
There are 118 hot springs and over 13 spa complexes in Budapest alone. All of these thermal baths are slightly different, with different mineral compositions. And they're supposed to have healing properties, which are said to treat anything from arthritis and rheumatism to neuralgia, and maybe circulation problems as well. But one thing's for sure. These baths are rich in magnesium and calcium. There's also sulfur, which is great for respiratory ailments. In any case, whether they have healing properties or not, these baths are definitely a godsend for the city.
Thermal baths aren't simply a source of leisure in Budapest. They're also therapeutic. They're medically prescribed as a treatment for many ailments and are partially covered by national health insurance. The Jewish community has played a key role in Budapest's evolution. Before World War II, a quarter of the city's population was Jewish. But half of these estimated 200,000 Jewish residents perished during the war. Today, the community is undergoing a renaissance like no other Jewish community in Europe.
Nowadays, the biggest Central Eastern European Jewish population is in Budapest. We know that there should be at least 100,000 Jews in Budapest and 100,000 people with Jewish origin, with Jewish roots in Budapest from the 2 million people of the capital. But it is important to say that most of these Jews are very much not affiliated in any sense with Judaism. Either they don't even know that they had Jewish parents or grandparents, or that's all that they know, that, yeah, that was a granddad who died in the war.
Hungarian Jews were very Hungarian. So they felt very Hungarian, they felt part of the nation, and This is why in the Second World War they were really surprised that this could happen to them, because they expected that, like, you know, like, we're Hungarians, what can happen?
How do you guys feel about your identity?
Well, I feel very Hungarian myself, with certain pride, and that's why it's really annoying that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and people actually question your Hungarian identity. Like, you're not proper Hungarian if you're Jewish. Like, people have 200% identities. This is totally ununderstandable for closed-minded people, and the number of closed-minded people seems to be rising, or they have always been around. They were just, I don't know, like,
Didn't have voice.
They didn't have a voice, and now there are parties which are supporting it. And the people come out with these ideas in the papers, and it's kind of becoming acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, and this is really scary.
What happened during the communist years?
In Budapest, if they wanted, they could go on practicing their religion, but it wasn't very much encouraged, especially for the young.
Your parents, for
Our
instance.
parents' generation,
Yes.
they were practically missing from Jewish life. They are practically missing from Jewish life. If you wanted to go to high school, if you wanted to go to university, if you wanted to get a good job, it wasn't very good to practice any kind of religion. Because of what happened during the war, our parents' generation many times chose not to be Jewish. Where there was already buildings and everything was built and Jews moved into that area, they couldn't build new big synagogues. What they could do is rent out or buy flats and make these apartments into synagogues. So in this area, we learned it when we started to come here. We learned it from the old people that there was at least 20 of these little
Hidden
so-called
synagogues.
hidden synagogues, so-called stibelach, which is the Yiddish word for a praying room.
Okay. Köszönöm. Where are we?
This is the courtyard where somewhere here there is a synagogue. Can you find it?
Somewhere here there is a synagogue.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
There is a sign.
There is a sign.
Nobody ever sees the
No one
sign.
has
No.
seen the sign.
Now you have to show me. Now you have
So
to.
this is here. This one is here. This is the one here. This is a Hanukkah.
Oh, of course.
But don't worry, it's like
Oh. Oh, okay. Am I okay like this?
Yeah, sure.
sure
Okay, so here we are.
this way.
Wow. Wow. Are there a lot of synagogues like this in Budapest?
No, this is the last one.
There used to be at least 50 in this area, in this neighborhood, and there were others all around the city. But this is the very last of this type. It has always been a family place. It was always a couple of families keeping it alive, coming here to pray. And somehow it managed to stay like that. And it's still a friendly, open place where anybody is welcome and anyone can join if they want.
This is the last one, so we want to keep it, to keep it and to keep it alive, so that it wouldn't become a museum or sold for the apartment or something, you know.
Are people coming back to religion in Budapest?
Well, we can say so, but it's not as general as coming back to the culture, the Jewish culture. So we have more and more Jewish food, Jewish places to eat, kosher style, not kosher, but kosher style places to eat out. And more people get their connection through food, through cultural events, and not through religion.
Budapest's very visible cultural revival is led, in large part, by the city's restaurants. Local food culture has reached new heights, specifically in the 7th district, the Jewish quarter. Kosher-style restaurants, many of which have given a very modern twist to traditional Jewish Hungarian cuisine, have grown very popular.
It's one of the most Jewish corners in the world. In the block opposite the street, this is where the Orthodoxy is, like their main synagogue is there, the headquarters, and even their kosher restaurant. There is no precedent of having a Jewish restaurant that is not exactly aimed at the people who are keeping kosher, but just as you go on a Wednesday to a French restaurant, Thursday to an Italian, and Monday you come to the Jewish restaurant to see what it's all about. There is a lot of people like my parents and like most of my family in the previous generation that are not really keeping the religion, but through their stomach they're Jewish. So like having a matzo ball soup or a certain sweet will get you closer to something that you are not practicing, but you really are. So food is always a central part. We try to have the roots and try to be modern at the same time. So basically this is Jewish-style eggs. That's Jewish-style eggs with the crispy goose skin broken down and put into the pâté, and that's liver pâté. So that's basically eggs and lard. Lard!
I'm sure it brings back memories.
Yes,
for you.
and it's also very nice that when we have like family gatherings here, and you see the old grandmothers sit and say, oh, this is something, it's like I made it, or like, oh, I haven't had this since my mom made something. It's very interesting.
Is there a real food culture in Budapest?
The answer is yes. Like we have Michelin star restaurants, we have small little restaurant-like things that are dating back 40 years to communist times, and anything in between. And especially in the past 5-6 years, a lot of very high quality, very high standard places opened. Not necessarily expensive, but
Innovative.
yes. And we're trying here to put our hands a little bit on tradition and also go and take a step ahead and be a little bit creative.
Why do you think there is such a revival here in Budapest?
It's a natural evolution of social evolution. I think that now that there is democracy, people are much more free to practice their religion, and they want to practice. And you know, in Judaism, it says that you don't have to be very religious, you just have to be a little more religious than your parents. If you keep a little bit more, you observe a bit more, you get closer. And if you keep that in through all the generations, then at one point, we all become like, I don't know, very religious. So the same way as within my small family, there is a revival and an evolution. On the larger scale, the same.
Okay, like that, maybe.
Maybe you should stand up.
Maybe you should smile.
That's my happiest face.
Look at that. Gee. Oh, there you go.
Despite its tragic past, the Jewish quarter is now a hub of social activity, and the nightlife here is nothing short of amazing. The streets are lined with one-of-a-kind restaurants and bars that attract both locals and crowds from very diverse cultural backgrounds.
The Jewish quarter has become the #1 neighborhood for all nightlife in Budapest. So this is where it all happens.
On le sent déjà, on est en début de soirée, il y a beaucoup d'action, il y a beaucoup de gens, il y a beaucoup de restos et de bars, mais c'était pas toujours comme ça ici.
Non, bien sûr, il y a eu des...
No, it hasn't always been like this. There have been dark periods in Hungary's history. There were waves of deportations here. Jews were enclosed in the Budapest ghetto, in the very streets where we're walking right now. And then, during the post-World War II period, during Hungary's communist years, people began leaving the neighborhood, and the buildings were left vacant. And today, some of these vacant buildings are being repurposed for nightlife. They're being converted into bars or into kurts, which are Hungarian beer gardens. So whether it's winter or summer, there's always something going on here. It's very lively. That's the dual nature of this neighborhood. It has a dark past, but it's been given a new lease on life. This has been a party neighborhood for a while. There was already nightlife here, but it's really booming right now. The neighborhood has evolved since I arrived here, with the number of night spots growing at breakneck speed. There were a few bars further up the street, but no more than 10 or 15. Now, there are nearly 100. And that evolution has brought its share of changes for the residents, as they have to put up with all the noise and partying. It's mostly young people who go out, who want to have fun. They don't really think about the residents. They're boisterous. They throw garbage in the streets.
Parce que c'est un quartier résidentiel aussi.
It has always been a residential neighborhood.
Oui, c'est étonnant parce qu'avec toute cette activité nocturne, c'est étonnant qu'il y ait encore autant de résidents.
It's always been a residential area, but the residents are starting to complain more and more. It's turning into a conflict, but there's nothing much they can do other than complain. There are droves of charter planes bringing in tourists from Britain, France, Italy, and other European countries, and even from North America.
Qu'est-ce qui a amorcé le changement dans le quartier ici?
Well, on the one hand, some of these buildings were derelict and could be snapped up for next to nothing. And on the other hand, you had these collectives of party people, young entrepreneurs who quite simply wanted to create spaces where they could go out at night. And that's how the ruin pubs concept came about. The name says it all. It's a bar in ruins. Although they may be in ruins, some of these buildings are often quite beautiful. It's just that they were neglected and not necessarily occupied for many years. Some of them were former factories and now resemble Aladdin's cave. They're great places to join friends after work for a drink or to party. Beer flows freely, and it's easy to start up conversations with just about anyone. From the outside, you're often a little surprised and don't really want to come in unless you're the curious type, because you wonder, what is this? Will this building collapse on top of me? But when you walk in, a whole new world opens up before you.
After dark, we make our way to a kert, an outdoor bar located on a vacant lot.
For 50 euros, or rather 100 euros for a return trip, you can come to Budapest and bring all your friends for the entire weekend, and you can have your bachelor party or your bachelorette party. I have to admit I'm a bit skeptical sometimes because it's become very trendy to do that. I'm not sure the guys actually get married afterwards. I think they just come for the stag parties. There's more a feeling of, come on, we'll have a huge party and get really drunk. They're drawn to that Eastern European flavor. What's more, the beer's cheap, the women are pretty, and there are plenty of little hideaways. And there's also that sense of freedom they get from not being at home. On top of all of that, tons of youth hostels have opened up in Budapest over the last few years in private apartments. So, there's an abundance of accommodations at very reasonable prices. It all adds up to a cheap, fun-filled weekend.
Budapest's growing reputation as a party destination is making it the stage for an impressive number of European bachelor parties. But the new modern Budapest isn't hiding only in the rundown buildings of the 7th district. The repurposing of vacant buildings is a trend here, often where you'd least expect it.
This used to be a department store even before the Second World War, but then it got damaged, and that's why they put this metal sheeting around it, covering the facade.
Look at that. Okay, so there's the bar
Yeah,
at the top of the building.
exactly.
Ooh, okay.
It's not one of the tourist spots they advertise to 60 years old tourists. So.
Look at that. This is nice. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
Not bad at all. A lot of buildings are being repurposed instead of being torn down.
Yeah.
How come?
I think tearing them down would be sometimes against the regulations. These are UNESCO heritage site. This building also is of historical significance, but there is no money to properly repair them. There's no investors willing to buy and convert these into expensive apartments or hotels or whatever. There used to be investors who bought these from the municipalities from cheap, or maybe the municipalities are lending these places until they find a way to renovate them and put them into kind of a different use. And in the meanwhile, it's affordable to rent because we're still in an economic crisis in Hungary.
Yeah, but what is this building now?
It's difficult to explain. It's a mix of things. Probably you have seen all these fast food things, the pizza parlor, little bars at the ground floor. And then there's this Asian cheap wares and clothes store inside the department store area. There's a whole level converted to arts level, and this is what they call it, művészeti szint, műszi.
There's a lot of recycling going on. Is it out of necessity?
I think it used to be, and to a certain extent, with some of the venues, it still is. So if you look at Musi, for example, their full interior decoration and kind of wooden paneling is scavenged from an old art cinema that some of the artists used to occupy before they moved in here. And when they decided to close down that cinema, they took that with them so that they can decorate this space. So there is the necessity part. And then you have the really organized projects, either governmental projects like Millenáris, which again used to be a factory in the inner part of Buda, and they repurposed it to make space for digital archives, a science museum, a theater space, but all of it was like carefully manicured lawns and landscaping and a lot of money flowing in. Chepa, which used to be a big industrial hub, they still run businesses in the old facilities of this major engineering factory, but they are broken down into smaller spaces and smaller enterprises use them. We have a lot of really solidly built architecture that even without renovation lasted 100 years. And you can knock it down and that costs you money, and then you probably have to struggle with the authorities who might want to save those buildings, or you can repurpose them. And I think that repurposing is also more fashionable. I think in the 70s and 80s, they knocked down these buildings, and now they want to preserve them because they have something special. This city is like an old, sitting chair that maybe it's beaten up, maybe it looks ugly, but you set so much in it that it's really convenient. So this is how I feel about my city. Maybe not all the streets and buildings are very pretty, but there's a certain beauty in it, and I feel very much at home. And I think that's an attitude here as well. I think there are people trying to be something, and you see those bars and those restaurants, and then there is a crowd who just does their thing. And that's very exciting.
With over 1,000 years of history, the neighborhoods that make up Budapest owe their multidimensional personality to a complex past. Destroyed and rebuilt over time, the city proudly shows its character everywhere you look. But the word is definitely out there, and odds are the Queen of the Danube won't remain Europe's best-kept secret for long.